All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today's deep dive is going to be a fascinating one, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
We're tackling a region that is just overflowing with history, so much conflict, the Levant. I know you're out there, and you're looking to really untangle this story, this long, long story of the Israelites and the Jews and the Palestinians. And we're going to try to do that today.
We are.
So we're going to be looking at a really interesting YouTube video. It's in Arabic. The title translates to The Complete Story of the Children of Israel. And this is really ambitious, what this video is trying to do. It's a huge timeline they're covering. They start way back with the Canaanites, 3,500 BC.
Wow.
All the way to, the modern-day Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So
huge.
Our mission today is to try to extract the key insights from this video and try to make sense of this really tangled history.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about this video is that it really dives into those difficult questions, right? Those connections that are so complex. It's not just about listing dates and events, but it's about really trying to figure out how those things connect and how they continue to shape what we see today.
Yeah, I love that it's like we're building a puzzle, and we got to start with the very first pieces. So let's go way, way back in time to those first pieces, right?
Yeah.
3,500 BC, the Canaanites, the region's, earliest inhabitants.
Right.
They were Semitic people. So they were descendants of Noah's son Shem, just like the Arabs and the Jews that we're going to be talking about.
Right, and that's really important to keep in mind, especially when we start talking about, terms like anti-Semitism, which often gets thrown around and sort of misused when it comes to talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because both Arabs and Jews are Semites, right? They share that common ancestry.
Yeah, it's so much more nuanced.
It's not as simple as it's often portrayed.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this land inhabited by the Canaanites, and this pivotal figure enters the scene. Abraham, or Ibrahim, as he's known in Arabic. He shows up around 18th century BC, and he brings with him this revolutionary idea, monotheism.
Mm-hmm.
And what really struck me in this video was how much this one idea would come to shape, three major world religions.
Oh, absolutely. And the ripples, the effects of Ibrahim coming onto the scene are really immense. He's the patriarch, right, for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Abrahamic faiths that would go on to shape not just the Levant, but global history.
It's amazing how much impact one person, one idea can have.
Right. It makes you think about what might seem like isolated events can have these huge consequences.
Totally. And, the lineage continues from Abraham to his son Isaac, and then to Isaac's son Jacob, or Jacob. And Jacob's Hebrew name, Yisrael, which means servant of God, becomes really crucial here. Because his descendants, they become known as the children of Israel, the B'nai Israel.
Right, and that's where the name Israel originates, and it ties the land directly to Jacob and his descendants. But it's not just about the names, right? It's about that deep religious and cultural significance that this land has for both Jews and Muslims.
Yeah, it's so key to understanding everything that comes later.
It really is, and I think, we need to kind of keep that in mind as we go through this.
Absolutely. So the video then goes into the story of Joseph, Jacob's son, and his brothers.
Yeah.
And it's such a captivating story. It's a story of jealousy and betrayal and reconciliation. It's a story that's really resonated for thousands of years.
Oh, absolutely. And beyond the sort of drama of it, right, it touches on another recurring theme in this region's history. Migration and diaspora, the Israelites' journey to Egypt. It foreshadows their future exiles and returns. And it mirrors the experience of, so many people throughout history who have been, forced to leave their homelands.
Yeah, it's such a universal story.
Yeah.
Speaking of journeys, right, we come to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, led by Moses, or Musa, 13th century BC. The parting of the Red Sea, the escape from slavery. These are stories that have captured people's imaginations for centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to place this exodus within the historical context of Egypt at the time, right? The video mentions the Hyksos, this foreign dynasty that ruled Egypt and allowed the Israelites to settle there. But when the native Egyptian pharaohs regained power, they expelled the Hyksos, and that may have contributed to the Israelites' exodus.
Oh, so it's like a chain reaction of events.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's not as, sort of cut and dry, as some stories might make it seem.
Right. So after the Exodus, the Israelites, led by Joshua, they conquer Canaan.
Right.
And they establish the kingdom of Israel. And that's when we get figures like David and Solomon.
Right, right. And that's when Jerusalem, or Al-Quds, takes center stage. But the video really makes a point of emphasizing that Jerusalem's story doesn't start with the Israelites. It was known as Jebus long before their arrival. It was ruled by King Melchizedek, who, as the video recounts, even welcomed Abraham.
It's amazing how much history Jerusalem has.
Oh, absolutely, and even predating the arrival of the Israelites, it was already the significant place. And it's really fascinating how the name itself reflects this sort of layered history, right? So Jebus evolved into Jerusalem, meaning mountain of peace, and then to Urshalim under Israelite rule, and finally to the Jerusalem that we know today. But each name change, it marks this shift in power and influence, and it shows just how deeply intertwined the history of this city is with the history of the entire region.
Yeah, it's a microcosm of the whole region. But, as we know, this kingdom, this Israelite kingdom, it wouldn't last forever. In 597 BC, we have the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. He conquers Jerusalem, destroys Solomon's temple, and sends the Jews into exile.
Right, and this exile was really a turning point in Jewish history. Not only was their central place of worship destroyed, but the experience itself, it fueled this longing, this yearning to return and to rebuild their homeland. And this yearning would really have a profound impact on Jewish identity and shape, many of their future actions.
So it's almost like this exile planted the seeds for what would come later.
In a way,
yeah. And then the video takes us to the rise of the Persian Empire, to Cyrus the Great. And he allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem, to rebuild their temple. And this always struck me as interesting. Why would Cyrus, a ruler of a different faith, allow this?
Well, the Persian Empire was known for its tolerance of diverse religions and cultures. Unlike many empires before them, the Persians didn't try to force their beliefs on conquered peoples. And this policy of tolerance, it really played a crucial role in the Jews' ability to return and reestablish themselves in Jerusalem.
It's such a stark contrast with so much of what we see throughout history.
Oh, absolutely. It really
with empires trying to impose their will.
Yeah.
So after the Persians, we had the Egyptian Ptolemies, then the Syrian Seleucids. The Levant seems like it's just constantly changing hands. It's hard to keep track of all these empires.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that this pattern of conquest and control, it goes back centuries. The Levant's location, its strategic location, its resources, and its religious significance, all of this made it a coveted prize for empires throughout history. And this constant struggle for dominance, it really shaped the region's cultural and religious landscape, right. Influencing the interactions between different groups, right. and contributing to a lot of the complexity that we see today.
Yeah, it's like this region was always at the crossroads of different empires and different ideas.
Yeah.
And, the video points out this fascinating pattern that they call the curse of the 8th decade. It seems like Jewish kingdoms in this region kept collapsing after roughly 80 years.
Yeah. Now, of course, it's not a literal curse, right? Oh. But the fact that this pattern repeated itself, it suggests that maintaining independence in such a volatile region, it was incredibly challenging. These kingdoms, they were constantly facing pressure from powerful neighbors, and internal conflicts likely contributed to their instability.
It's like a constant push and pull.
Yeah.
For power.
Yeah.
Making it hard for anyone to hold on for too long.
Right, and this struggle for control, it continues into the next chapter as the Romans arrive in 3 BC.
Right. So a new power enters the scene.
Exactly.
But just a few years later, we have another momentous event in the city of Bethlehem. The birth of Jesus, marking the beginning of the Common Era. And it's fascinating to think about how, this small region gave rise to another major world religion.
Absolutely. And the arrival of Jesus adds another layer of complexity to the story.
Right.
While Jews view him as a historical figure, Christians believe he is the Son of God, and Muslims revere him as a prophet. So, despite their different interpretations, all three religions recognize his significance. And they share this common origin in the monotheism that was introduced by Abraham.
It's a reminder that even within a shared history,
right,
different perspectives can emerge.
Absolutely.
and it can lead to both unity and division.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as the video highlights, the relationship between early Christians and the Jewish community, it was not without its conflict.
Right, and the video points out that some Jewish authorities played a role in Jesus' persecution by the Romans, and it's a sensitive subject, of course. But it's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. So to understand this, we have to consider the historical context, right?
Exactly, and we have to think about, some Jewish leaders saw Jesus's teachings as a threat, to their authority, to their traditions, and that created these tensions that spilled over into their interactions with the Romans.
So it wasn't just about religious differences, it was about power struggles too.
Exactly, and it's about these competing visions within the Jewish community itself.
Right, and as Christianity spreads, we see this persecution going both ways. Christians face persecution from the Romans, sometimes fueled by these tensions with Jewish authorities. And it's just this tragic cycle of persecution fueled by religious fervor and political power. But then things shift dramatically in 313 AD with the rise of Constantine.
Right. Constantine's conversion to Christianity and its subsequent adoption as the official religion of the Roman Empire, it had a profound impact. The group that had been persecuted now became the persecutor. It demonstrates how quickly the dynamics of power can change and how easily religious tolerance can give way to intolerance.
Right. And so the tables turn completely. And now it's the Jews facing persecution, leading to the Jewish diaspora. Their dispersal across Europe, Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula.
Right, and this diaspora had a lasting impact on Jewish history. Forced from their homeland, they established communities far and wide, adapting to new environments while clinging to their traditions, their faith. And this experience of dispersal, it really shaped their collective identity and influenced the course of their history for centuries to come.
So much of history is about displacement and migration.
Yeah.
And, the video specifically mentions Jewish settlements in the Arabian Peninsula about 200 years before the rise of Islam in 610 AD. And this is a detail that explains their presence in Medina when the Prophet Muhammad arrived.
Right, and this is a crucial point to remember as we move into the Islamic era. The Prophet Muhammad's arrival in Medina coincided with the presence of these established Jewish tribes, setting the stage for both cooperation and conflict between these communities.
All right, so each chapter of this story just seems to layer on more complexity.
Yeah, it really does.
And with the rise of Islam, we're entering a period that would further shape the fate of this region.
Yeah.
And its people.
Absolutely. And understanding those dynamics, those new dynamics that come with the advent of Islam is essential to understanding the present.
Yeah, so we've set the stage, we've laid the groundwork, and now we're gonna dive into this next era.
Okay, sounds good.
This Islamic era.
All right.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back, and we're diving headfirst into the Islamic era, a period that really reshaped the Levant. The video starts by focusing on those early interactions, between Muslims and Jews in Medina. And it's interesting, it highlights that the Prophet Muhammad actually established treaties with the Jewish tribes that were already living there.
Yeah, these treaties they're really fascinating because they kind of offer us this glimpse into a time when peaceful coexistence, it was actually possible, even though there were these religious differences. They were trying to create a framework for cooperation, mutual respect between this new Muslim community and those established Jewish tribes.
Yeah, that sounds like, a really promising beginning, but knowing history, things don't always stay peaceful. The video mentions that conflicts eventually arose, leading to, the expulsion of some Jewish tribes from Medina. Why did those early attempts at coexistence, why did they fall apart?
Well, it's a complex question, and historians, they offer, a lot of different explanations. Some point to political and economic tensions. Those were the driving forces, behind the conflict. Others, they emphasize more of the ideological differences and struggles for influence within this new Muslim community. And the reality is probably, it's probably a mix of all these factors.
So it's a good reminder that even when, everyone starts with good intentions, actually building lasting peace, it can be really hard, especially in a region that's seen so much conflict and shifting power.
Oh, absolutely. And, keeping that complexity in mind is so important when we look back at historical events. simple narratives, they don't really capture the nuance of what actually happened.
Right, right. And, speaking of looking back, the video shifts focus to a really pivotal moment. The Muslim conquest of Jerusalem in 636 AD, led by Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. And it emphasizes this covenant that Umar made with the Christian inhabitants of the city, granting them protection and freedom to worship.
Yeah, Umar's covenant, it's super significant because it kind of establishes this precedent for how religious minorities were treated under Islamic rule. By guaranteeing the safety of Christians and their churches, Umar was doing something really different than what happened, under Byzantine rule.
Yeah.
It's a really early example of religious tolerance that is often kind of, pushed aside in Western historical narratives.
Yeah, definitely a different perspective than what we often hear. And speaking of, contrasting perspectives, the video jumps forward to the Crusades and the Christian conquest of Jerusalem in 1099.
Yeah, and that juxtaposition is intentional. They're trying to highlight the really stark differences in how religious minorities were treated during these two conquests. You have Umar, who is seeking this peaceful coexistence and offering protection, and then you have the Crusaders engaging in brutal violence and massacres targeting Muslims and Jews, and that contrast, it challenges this simple narrative of a perpetually intolerant Islam versus like a tolerant West.
Right, it's a good reminder to be wary of those big generalizations. Like, we really need to look at each historical event within its specific context.
Absolutely. And the Levant's history is just full of examples that defy those easy categorizations. Even within the Crusades, you have instances that challenge that dominant narrative. For example, after Saladin recaptures Jerusalem in 1187, he allows Jews to return to the city. He even helps them rebuild their synagogue. And that act of tolerance, it really contrasts with what the Crusaders did and complicates our understanding of this really tumultuous period.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. Saladin allowing the Jews to return after centuries of conflict and displacement. It just goes to show how much history is about perspective and how we interpret those events.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember that history is written by the victors. And oftentimes those narratives, they oversimplify or erase the experiences of marginalized groups.
Absolutely. So the video takes this really interesting turn then, shifting the focus to Europe between the 13th and 18th centuries. And it really dives into the widespread persecution of Jews during that period. Expulsions, pogroms, discriminatory laws. Just a dark chapter.
Yeah, it's a period marked by really, really deep-seated anti-Semitism. Jews were often scapegoated for societal problems, accused of, everything from causing plagues to poisoning wells. And this prejudice, it was fueled by this mix of, religious intolerance and economic anxieties, and it led to this systemic discrimination and violence.
And the video contrasts that with the relative safety and tolerance that Jews experienced in Muslim lands during the same period, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, it's a crucial comparison because it challenges this narrative that we're often presented with, this idea of Muslim oppression versus European enlightenment. But while Jews were, facing violence and exclusion in Europe, they often found greater acceptance and opportunities in Muslim-ruled lands. So again, it's a reminder that historical realities are much more nuanced than these simple binaries.
Right. Right. And it's like the video even mentions a Jewish governor that was appointed in Fatimid Egypt, which is just unthinkable in the context of what was happening in Europe at the time.
Yeah. And while it's important to acknowledge that Jewish life under Muslim rule wasn't always, perfect, and there were instances of persecution, it does highlight the diversity of experiences and the complexities of interfaith relations throughout history.
It seems like a constant theme here is just to avoid those sweeping judgments and really look at the full spectrum of historical events.
Absolutely. And that nuanced understanding, it becomes even more important as we approach the modern era and the emergence of Zionism in the late 19th century.
Right. So the video introduces, Theodor Herzl, the founder of modern Zionism, and talks about how he witnessed the rampant anti-Semitism in Europe. And envisioned, the creation of a Jewish state as a solution.
Yeah, and Herzl's experience, he was a journalist and he covered the Dreyfus affair in France, and that experience, deeply affected him. He saw firsthand this blatant anti-Semitism, this injustice, and it convinced him that Jews, they needed their own state for safety, for self-determination, and his writings, his activism, it really galvanized the Zionist movement, which was seeking to establish that Jewish homeland in Palestine.
And the video also mentions that, it wasn't just European anti-Semitism that was fueling Zionism, but also the influence of Christian Zionist ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really important point that's often overlooked. You have these Protestant groups that believed that the return of Jews to Palestine, it was a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ. And that theological belief, it provided support for the Zionist movement, and it influenced Western attitudes towards Jewish claims to the land. And it's a good reminder that religious ideas, even when they seem unrelated, they can have a huge impact on political events.
Yeah, it's like all these different threads are intertwining to create like the tapestry of history.
Yeah.
And those threads, they get even more tangled as we move into the 20th century.
Oh, yeah. The 20th century brings all these dramatic shifts in global power dynamics and sets the stage for the events that lead to the creation of Israel and the subsequent Palestinian displacement, the Nakba.
It's a complex topic.
Yeah.
It's emotionally charged, and I'm ready to get into it. Let's dive into that in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, let's do it.
We're back, and I feel like this is where the real weight of this history hits us. 1948, the year the Nakba, as the video calls it, began for the Palestinians.
Yeah, 1948 really is this turning point, and to understand the conflict today, you have to understand what happened then. And the video, it doesn't shy away from this, and it offers a lot of insights into what happened, the complexities of the Nakba, the Arabic word for catastrophe.
Just the word itself, catastrophe, it tells you a lot. And the video talks about it as this mass displacement of Palestinians from their homes and their land. Help us understand the scale of this. How many people were we talking about?
Well, the estimates are that over 700,000 Palestinians were displaced during the Nakba. Entire villages were emptied, communities were just scattered, people becoming refugees in neighboring countries. It's hard to even grasp, Think about if almost everyone in Seattle was forced from their homes in a year, that kind of scale. That's a huge number of people and a lot of suffering, and loss.
It's hard to even imagine that level of displacement, the trauma that comes with it, And the video then goes into the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 and how that, solidified this displacement.
Yeah, that war, it erupted, after Israel declared statehood, and Israel won a decisive victory, and that victory allowed them to expand their territory, beyond what the UN had proposed, pushing even more Palestinians out and really cementing their control over the land.
The video uses this term, settler colonialism, to describe what was happening. How does that concept apply here?
So settler colonialism is basically when settlers come to a land and the goal is to stay there permanently, replace the people who are already there. And some people argue that that's what was happening in Palestine, that the Zionist project, with its goal of creating this Jewish state in a land that was already inhabited by Palestinians, that it fits that definition. And from that point of view, the displacement of Palestinians, it wasn't just some accident of war, but a feature of the Zionist project itself.
Mm-hmm. So it becomes about more than just a conflict over land, right? It becomes about who has the right to be there at all? How do you even define that right?
Exactly. And when you think about settler colonialism, it helps you see the power dynamics, the claims that both sides are making based on history and religion. And it helps you see why the struggle continues today, over the land, over resources, over who gets to decide what happens.
It's not just the past, though, right? The video talks about how the Nakba isn't over, that it still affects people today.
Absolutely. For millions of Palestinians, the Nakba is their present reality. Many of them are still living as refugees. They can't go back to the lands their families lived on for, generations. And that feeling of injustice, it fuels the fight for recognition, for Palestinians to have a say in their own future.
It's a reminder that history isn't just dates and events, right? It's people's lives. And those legacies of trauma, they don't just disappear.
Right. And we can't forget the conflict that's still happening. The video talks about, the 1967 Six-Day War when Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and that occupation is still going on. It affects Palestinians every day. It's a source of tension and, sometimes violence.
It's been over 75 years since 1948, and it feels like this conflict is just as stuck as ever. What does the video say about how Palestinians have, resisted this?
It talks about how they've resisted in a lot of different ways. Some groups, like the PLO, have used armed struggle. Others have focused on nonviolence, like boycotts, trying to get businesses and countries to put pressure on Israel. And the video also talks about, how Palestinians aren't always united, that they have their own internal divisions, which makes it even harder.
Yeah, we've covered so much in this deep dive. It's kind of mind-blowing. And it's clear that this video, as great as it is, it's just a starting point.
It is. But it gives you a good foundation, It helps you see the historical roots, the religious and political forces that have shaped the Levant. And you need that to understand what's happening today.
Yeah. We started with ancient empires, saw religions being born, followed the rise of Zionism, and ended up, in this conflict that's still unfolding.
And as we wrap this up, I think the biggest takeaway is this. History isn't just about memorizing facts, right? It's about trying to see the world through other people's eyes, questioning what we think we know, and recognizing that, we're all connected, even when we disagree.
That's a good way to put it. The video's creator, they encourage people to keep learning. And I have to say, I want to do that too.
Yeah, and as you do, keep this in mind. History is rarely simple, and it's never just one side story. The best way to understand it is to look for the complexities, and to challenge those easy answers.
Solid advice. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the history of the Levant. It's been a journey.
It has. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep learning, keep asking questions, just keep trying to understand the world and its history.